Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we like to light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. This week, in a live recording of the Madlik Clubhouse at 4 p.m. on Friday, I am joined by Rabbi Adam Mintz as we contrast two approaches to Judaism, one consistent and steadfast, and the other irregular and episodic. So get out of your chair and join this week's adventure as we discuss Judaism for the accidental tourist. I was asked this week on Friday night, right after our session last week, why in my bio I call myself a post-Orthodox Jew. And I think this week is a good example. The post-Orthodox, it's not, the emphasis is not on what I am no longer. The emphasis is on my point of departure, meaning to say, we all move. I could be a post-reform, I could be a post-Buddhist, I could be a post-conservative, but because I spent so many years in the Orthodox community going to traditional yeshivot, many of my references are from my Orthodox years. So it informs pretty much a lot of my thought process. And today, we're taking a verse, it's Leviticus 26:21, and it's basically God speaking to the Jewish people, and you can call it a threat. It says, if you remain, and again, here's the key word, be-keri. One of the translations that I found in Sefaria is hostile. If you remain hostile toward me and refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. So in the Hebrew, it's ve'im telchu imi keri. If you walk with me, keri, and don't and refuse to obey me, I will kind of act accordingly, is the sense. But the post-Orthodox part about it is, in the yeshiva world, and I'd love if you can confirm this, that this is the key almost bumper sticker for don't take your Judaism casually. You've got to have a long-term commitment. It has to be consistent. It has to be day in and day out. You can't pick and choose. And the way that translation is made is based on Rashi. And what Rashi says is that the word signifies irregularity, by chance. In Hebrew, we talk about a mikra. Something happened to me on the way to the forum, so to speak. It was an occurrence. And Rashi continues and says, if you deal with your religion, if you deal with your Judaism only occasionally, and if you do it irregularly and by chance, guess what? God is saying, I will act the same way to you. So before I explore it a little more and explore what it means to me, am I correct, Rabbi? Is this the kind of go-to commentary on this verse?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Geoffrey. You chose a fascinating verse. I mean, maybe a troubling verse, but a fascinating verse. You're 100% right, and this is one of those great examples where Rashi really gives meaning to the verse. You wouldn't really know what the verse was about without Rashi. Meaning the word "keri" is a funny word. You see it in the source sheet that you sent out. Means you quoted a Bible scholar by the name of Baruch Levine, who says that it means hostility. Rashi says that the word "keri," like you said, is related to the word "mikra," which means by accident. Now, I don't know if Rashi, is absolutely the only possible explanation for the word. But once you accept Rashi, it's so striking what the verse is telling us. It says, if you follow me irregularly, means if you don't really have a strong commitment to Judaism, then I am going to punish you. And that's really the key word. I think that's, Geoffrey, that's a word in life generally, but in Judaism especially, the idea of consistency. You need to be consistent.
Fantastic. So you've confirmed the interpretation. So now let me share an incident that happened to me. As I said before, I was very religious in my youth from age 14 to 23 or 4. So I recently, in the last 5 or 10 years, I bumped into a religious person who knew me from those days. And clearly I wasn't wearing a kippah, and I had gone through some changes. So he said to me, Shlomo, he says, what are you doing vis-a-vis the Torah? So I said, well, I'm not quite as observant as I used to be, but I have a podcast, I have a blog, I study Torah a lot. It's really meaningful to me, but not in the same way. And he came back and he says, so it's a hobby. And I'm sure in his mind, he was insulting me at the deepest level, based on this verse. You could almost pinpoint it to this verse. And my initial reaction was it really made me smile from ear to ear, but I started thinking about it. And I said, what is so bad about Judaism being a hobby? There are people that play golf that wake up every morning and all they can dream about is golf. The same goes for fishing. The same goes for 1,000 other things in our lives. But we don't kill over it. We don't lose friendships over it. So I think what I'd like to kind of explore today is, number one, what happens if the translation is wrong? And what happens if it really has nothing to do, this pivotal verse has nothing to do with those of us who are occasional Jews. I gave the name of the source sheet, Judaism for the Accidental Tourist. Some of us who are passionate about our Judaism, but we're not the type of Jew that says, okay, there are 613 commandments, there are 100 blessings, I've got to check every box, I've got to be consistent. Maybe we zigzag a little more. Is there room for us? Is there a place for us to the point of not only are we given a place in the corner, but is that a parallel approach? And can we live a fulfilling life as a Jew where it is slightly different, where it might have the same passion, but it's more irregular? Michael, welcome. Baruch A.
Baruch Makom. I just want to say something very short. It seems to me that people have hobbies because they love them. Just like you described the golfer. You get up in the morning, you have a hobby, you do it because you love it. It's free. It's actually totally free. No one tells you to. It's coming from a very deep place. And depending what your hobby is, you could grow from it. So that's what I want to say. I think the guy did you a favor.
Thank you. Well, anybody who makes me think about Torah and life differently is doing me a favor, and that favor you do to me all the time. Rabbi, what are your thoughts?
You see, I agree with Michael that he actually, that's nice that he said that you're passionate about it. But I want to explain what he meant. What he meant was it's a hobby. It's not obligatory. You see, to the Orthodox, the idea of Judaism is that it's obligatory. It's not a hobby. It's not voluntary. The minute that it's voluntary, I decide, do I want to observe about this? So I think that's a very important idea, the difference between voluntary and mandatory. So he was saying to you that you look at your Judaism as being voluntary. That was a criticism on his part. I don't think that should be taken as a criticism. I think it's the passion that's important.
Great. I do think it's a valid point, and I hadn't really thought about that. Michael, the other Michael,
Yes.
What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is that a hobby you do from joy, and I think following or trying to listen for God's guidance is a joyous full-time occupation when we pause, when we breathe, when we have a tendency to react. But what I'm feeling is being Jewish, or the God of the Jews, is a punishing, fear-instilling God. And that's, you don't do a hobby out of fear. It's more than obligation. That little sentence that you read, it reminds me of that God that punishes and that makes people who aren't perfect feel terrible and makes low self-esteem in people. Everything you've been talking about, a punishing God that threatens you.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
That's powerful. I have to say that so there are many commentaries who say no. Actually, this does not mean if you work with God occasionally or accidentally. It's the wrong translation. So I am exploring today, Michael Stern, that this verse doesn't necessarily have to be that. So let's just set the table straight. And for those of you who are joining, we're looking at a verse in the Bible that is used by many to criticize those who look at their Judaism as something that they do, whether you call it as a hobby or is it occasionally, or they pick and choose. But nonetheless, they don't have that kind of rigor and consistency. And as Rabbi Adam says, maybe they don't have that sense of obligation. I love that sense of obligation. You know, we talk about Shomer Shabbat, someone, and typically that means observes Shabbat, and it's really a kind of almost a borderline. Either you do or you don't. It's kind of like being pregnant. And I was having dinner with Michael this week, and I know that he's accepted certain dietary restrictions upon himself, and he quote-unquote cheated a little bit over dessert. You know, there are those of us who watch our cholesterol. There are those of us who watch our diet. But in the English way that we say it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100%. It shows a bias in a good sense. It shows a practice. It shows an intention, and it shows an aspiration. But again, that touches about what you were saying, Rabbi, about this sense of obligation or aspiration, possibly. And I find that fascinating.
Well, you brought up something, a new idea now, Geoffrey, and that is the idea that Judaism is aspirational. And that is that we're not always where we would like to be, but the challenge of Judaism is to aspire to be better. That's what religion wants from us. Religion wants us to be better, wants us to aspire. I think that's a great phrase to use when we talk about what Judaism is about. Aspirational. I love that phrase.
So I don't know how many times, Rabbi, you look when you're dealing with a phrase and a question about how it should be translated, whether you look at the King James Bible. But I happened to look at the King James Bible on this verse, and I actually saw the original document, and there's a gloss in the side of it. And that gloss actually follows the interpretation of those who believe that you have to be consistent, and that this is talking about those who walk with God only incidentally. But the language that they use just blew me away. It says, or at adventures with me. In Old English, the word that they used for occasional or coincidentally was adventures with me. And that brings in a whole new aspect to this discussion, because it gets back to something that we were talking about a few weeks ago when we were discussing shul, attendance, prayer, whether you should do it on a regular basis or have this sense of discovery and renewal. And I think what I am trying to say is that walking with God, where it becomes something that is, I wouldn't say occasional, but is something that you kind of come in and out of, makes it into an adventure. And the adventure part of it can have absolutely more depth, more meaning, more intensity than this kind of solid line observance. And so I don't want to be misunderstood when I talk about the two different visions that we have here. The one vision has the stronger commitment, and the other is possibly more watered down. That's not what I'm saying, because and an adventure is a perfect example of that, where one goes into Judaism and one might do it regularly, but one is doing it each time as a radical leap of adventure. And expectations are similar to what one would have if one was going on an adventure. The adrenaline level is at the level of an adventure. And I would like to suggest that we're talking about something that has the potential of having a higher intensity level to it, as opposed to the other, which has a more solid, straight line, consistent approach to it. And from that level, they don't necessarily mean that there's less of a commitment or even an observance.
I would accept that. I think what you just explained was very much to the point, and I think that really brings out something that's special about what a commitment to Judaism is all about.
Great. So there is this concept in the Torah, in the Talmud, where there's a certain a passage in the tractate of Avodah Zarah, that they're dealing with someone who literally sinned his whole life, and then at that particular moment he rose to the occasion. And the language that it uses is konim olam haba בשעה. He merited the redemption. He merited a place in the world to come, in paradise, in 1 hour. And it does contrast that to the one who committed for many years. And the commentators say yes, and he accepted every commandment and fulfilled every one of the 613 commandments. So I think that piece of Talmud is really exposing us to two typoses, two types of people, two types of an approach. And I'm curious what others have to say, especially you, Rabbi, about how do you institutionalize that, though? How do you accept both of those characters within the framework? And more, how do you make a place for both of those characters within our Torah?
Well, we'll open it up to the other participants, but the idea that you can acquire your place in the world to come in 1 second is really, it's really, I think, a surprising notion. I think, Geoffrey, if you thought about it, you wouldn't think that. You would think if you want to acquire your place in the world to come, you've got to work at it all the time. But that's not what it says. Sometimes there are moments, and I think we all know this in life. There are moments, defining moments, when we define who we are and what we stand for. And I think that's what that beautiful passage from the Talmud is trying to teach us. But I'd love to hear what other people have to say.
I'm thinking that these might not be mutually exclusive. It's possible even that the chances of doing it in a way, a kavua way, a constant way, might be more opportunities for adventure than doing it in an adventuresome way, where my own heart goes after the adventure, of course. But I do have a question. What is it that brings you to have this adventure? In other words, if you don't have it every day, yom v'layla, what is it that makes this choice that determines or gives you the impulse to stop and dive in? If it's occasional or lovingly, what is it? That's my question.
I personally, and we can only talk about this personally, is that I do think you're right, that they are not mutually exclusive. I think that somebody once asked, I think it was Abraham Joshua Heschel, how can you possibly pray 3 times a day, 365 days a year, and expect to ever get that moment of that we're talking about now, of adventure? And he told a story. He said there was once a mountain town that there was an avalanche and it was cut off from the outside world, not for a week, not for a month, but for years. And most people at a certain point stopped winding their watches, because what's the point? We don't know what day it is, what the calendar is. There's no point. We're cut off. We have to look up at the sun maybe for time, but our watches as timekeepers are irrelevant. And there was one guy who wound his watch every day, and they looked at him as the village idiot. And then when finally they broke through the boulders and they came, everybody said, "Oh, we're dying to know, what time is it?" Of course their watches had rusted. And they were no longer they couldn't time them. But the guy, the village idiot who was winding that watch every day, was able to correct the time. And what Heschel was trying to say was that there's a certain level of expertise that one needs, whether one's a mountain climber, and that's your adventure, or you seek your adventure in the prayer book. And to do that, you have to feel comfortable on the mountains with the ropes, with the prayers. And that was his answer, so that we go through some of the rote stuff. But God forbid, literally, we should not be open to those moments where that day we walked into, we said our prayers, and that day there was something in our heart that needed to be said, or there was a word or an intention that moved us. I don't know if I answered your question, but that story that Heschel told occurred to me.
It's a wonderful story, and it does support the view that an opposite view than the one, not opposite, a different view than the one you began with. But I've just been, as you know, I've been looking a little bit into Kabbalah. I think I'm old enough now to do it. The world to come is not in the future. It's now. It's coming in this moment. So if you're there, like the man who, בשעה, in that 1 hour, he was present. He was there. And that was the world coming. The world that was here. The way we say to a groom, hine hu ba, he's here.
What, Michael? Why do you say that? You say that he merited his place in the world to come in one second. But why do you say that's the world to come? He inherited because he acted a certain way in this world.
Well, the world to come is not currently in my realm, or I'm not in its realm. And I really love the bits of Kabbalah that I've engaged in, which simply says, it's not olam haba, it's mamash haba, it's coming now, in this moment. It's not in the future. I'm not doing any of this to get points in the future. That's not where I live. I try to live now, and if I can be here really, really, really now with love, then I'm here in this present moment, and that is olam haba, if you want to call it that.
Well, I think that's a beautiful thought.
I wanted to say, Geoffrey and Rabbi and Michael, in this moment, this is an adventure. Every Friday at 4 o'clock, I come on and climb a mountain with you guys, and I have a lot of dissonance and some anger that it's magic. I ask my questions, I speak my mind on this adventure together with you guys, and I find peace. And I think that peace is the Gan Eden and its paradise and that taste. So this aspirational newness and adventure adventure is happening right now, and it feels great. And I really thank you guys.
Well, thank you for saying that and being part of it, because I feel the same way. It's wonderful especially to do it on a Friday afternoon, right before Shabbat, right before a moment, a day of holiness, or at least a disconnect where we have to change what we've done all week. And to do it with a discussion of people that can focus on one text or concept, kind of like a Hershaw test, where, it kind of tells as much about us as it does of the texts that we're studying, but it gives us a focus to react against. And I find it to be a very, very stimulating and enjoyable. But thank you for saying that, Michael.
Geoffrey, in the last, first of all, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Geoffrey. I just wondering in the last couple of minutes whether you want to go back to that word "keri" that we started with, Geoffrey, and the fact that that word has been interpreted in so many different ways. Rashi, who says it means consistency or inconsistency, and then Levine, Professor Levine, who said that it means hostility. I wonder whether we can land on an interpretation of that verse that really gives us that peace that Michael was describing.
What I think you're right, there was other interpretations that will resonate better with those of us who know Hebrew, from the word cold. Because after all, isn't this all about a relationship? God says, if you're cold with me, I'm going to be cold with you sevenfold. But relationships are reciprocal. And at the end of the day, that's what kind of God is saying here. I just wanted to react to and pull back from everybody who heaped on and say, oh, it means that you're not walking with me consistently. Because we all have relationships with those that we love and those that we need, and we don't have to be with them constantly. In fact, some of those relationships are more exciting and more profound because, distance makes the heart grow fonder, and relationships have up and downs. But I do like this concept of whether it's because you're hard with me, whether it's because you're cold with me, that there is this sense of we see a reflection of ourselves in God, and God potentially sees a reflection of him or her in us. There's concept of ani kodesh af atem tihe kodesh, that God is holy, and therefore we should be holy. In Hebrew, it's lahadmot, and in Latin, it's imitatio Dei, that we should copy the Godhead. And I think that even in the Seder, when we talk to the wicked son and the wise son, it says, Afata, you should also respond to them. It uses that same language of God saying, Afata, I am holy, and therefore also you should be holy. And I think with those people that we agree with and those people who we disagree with, we have to find a reflection of ourselves, and we have to create a reciprocal, nourishing relationship, sometimes through harmony and sometimes through dissonance. But if we're gonna end on that note, I wish all of us harmony and dissonance when they're appropriate in the Shabbat that we are about to enter. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us on this wonderful adventure that we've been having at 4:00 on Friday.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Shabbat shalom to everybody.
Shabbat shalom.